Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. This is episode 13. As in, if you've stayed with us this long, you're a completely different human than you were originally, and you might even be actually becoming mighty, because this series is all about what happens when you're pushed to your breaking point, and then you're totally snapped into pieces and left in tatters on the side of the road. Do you stand up still, even after that? Do you still kind of get up and keep going, or do you just stay there in the pieces on the side of the road? Kind of like the lion. You ever think about that story where Samson tears a lion into pieces with his bare hands? I visualize that, I think, a little differently than others. I've seen violence at that level, and it makes you a different kind of person once that happens to you. There was an important thing that Samson was walking in during that time, which is a little different than most people think of today. It was called a vow. He was operating under the authority of a vow that he had made with his creator. I read recently Numbers because, you know what? It's in the scriptures from the beginning to the end, and it's awesome. If you haven't read Numbers recently, highly recommended. Highly recommended. Granted, there's going to be some parts in there which have a lot of numbers in them. And all of you statisticians out there are going to geek out on it and be like, yes, my whole entire day is consumed with wondrous things. Other people, you're going to hit the pause button and be like, I don't even understand why they keep talking about the same things sometimes over and over and over again. You know, if the scriptures ever suddenly start saying the same thing or kind of the same thing over and over and over again, it's probably because they didn't have exclamation points. Like they just repeated themselves oftentimes when they really wanted to emphasize something. That was the way they did it. We just kind of read a sentence and then say, at the end of it, or we try to say it loudly. You know, that's our method. Either way, they repeated themselves a lot at times in there. And Chelsea and I were reading this weekend about how there is all these offerings that were being brought to the tabernacle when it was first dedicated, like a silver charger, a silver dish, a golden spoon, or tiny handheld shaped cup for dumping frankincense on things, which is delicious. There was all these special offerings, and then goats and rams and all these specific things, and each of the tribes was given the same amount of paragraph space to describe their offering. And it was a robust chapter. It's one of those chapters that gets a little lengthy after a while, and you start to really wonder, why in the world does this even matter? And then Chelsea and I did something which was behooving of us, and we studied. We actually looked it up, like, why does that matter? And you know why? One of the main reasons, it was to not show partiality from the lesser to the greater tribes, because physically there was more humans in one tribe than another, and they tend to get a little bit more, screen time. If you remember all your felt board days in Sunday school classes, mind you, this is not going to be a felt board kind of a morning. I'm probably liable to be a little teeved. It's been some trials and tribulations over here in the Reynolds front lately. And by that, I mean, we've been living in parking lots for a couple weeks, and that just gets a little hard after a while when all you have to think about is how to find water and get power to your home and sustenance to your family. It just makes you, go back to hierarchy of needs. That was right in the thick of it. It's been a little difficult to find places to be as of late, but look forward to another video. Chelsea and I are going to talk a little bit more about that, because the Reynolds are rolling all over the place right now, and it is a little hard to find places to be. Now, maybe you might be one of those places to be. Who knows? Pray about it. Needless to say, I digress. We've been a little anked on some things. And when suddenly we got to a place where we actually sat down and just read through the entire, there's these things called Torah portions. They're fantastic. I like to do read the whole scriptures in a year things. I've never been wholly committed to some of those, because the first time I ever read one was in the back of a bathroom. You know how a lot of people keep their Bibles in the back toilet, on top of the toilet in the bathroom. And I think that's a fantastic choice for where to keep one, because some of you out there, that's your one kind of time of solitude. I know a lot of parents, and being one, you look for those times of solitude. My bathroom is a composting toilet, so it's more like a bucket, which is a nice bucket. It was definitely made well, but it's still a bucket in a tinier space in our RV. It's not a space we like to spend any undue time in, so we don't have that quiet, alone space time. But I remember first reading through one of those year through a Bible in a year, And it made no sense to me because the first times I ever read it, it was just like I felt like somebody just threw the Bible in a blender and just chunked out all of these pieces, and they made no sense as to why they were congealed together. It was like somebody made a meat salad, and not a good one, like the worst kind of one. It was one of those kinds. But I got introduced to other ones where there's these things called Torah portions, where somebody takes from the Torah, the first 5 books of the scriptures. Then there's a lot of meatiness that comes out of the prophets, the writings, and then the New Covenant, the New Testament times. It's awesome. And those tend to be fantastic and enriching and vibrant. And so I really like those. We try to read through some of those on Shabbat especially. But we have 2 tiny children. Well, one really tiny, and she is on the move. Boy, she's hard to keep track of in this tiny rectangle. But that being said, we were reading through that passage and we got into Numbers, and it was literally the section in Numbers that I remember every year I read it as being the section I kind of am like, oh, I'm not trying to say that there's parts of the Bible that make me feel that way, but this is one of them. Makes me feel that way. But I remembered, if I look up why, it would probably help me right now, because I do a lot of menial tasks on farms. My wife and I have devoted ourselves to trying to learn sustainable agricultural skills before the end of the world as we know it, instead of trying to figure it out as the world is ending around us. We're already stressed out on a given day anytime you're on a farm. There's a lot happening. You're generally short on labor. You generally need all kinds of stuff you don't have, and you're learning to make do with skill sets that are suboptimal. It's challenging. It's a lot like the military. I'm learning that lesson the hard way too. So because of that, we just adapt and try to overcome. So we've been trying to sharpen those skill sets as much as we could ahead of time. And it's been good, but it's also brutally challenging and sometimes just boring. Sometimes you're doing the same thing over and over again, like hauling mulch over and over and over again. Not so exciting and glamorous as I harvested the fruit today. Those are beautiful days. Those are days where it's like, yeah, the reapers are smiling because it's been a good day. But Numbers for me has some of those chapters in it. And this is one of them. Maybe I should just look it up real quick because I didn't plan on talking about Numbers even remotely. But, you know, if you guys didn't know it, I don't have like a framework of reference to operate off of besides the 850,000 things that are rolling through my head at a given moment. So it could get wily and spindly like a spool of weaving twine. Needless to say, we're back in, I think, Numbers 7, because did you know there's Gibborim in Numbers? Some of the best mighty men stories you'll ever read in your life are in Numbers. Balaam, son, look up Balaam. He's a dude who was so mighty, he wrecked shop for thousands and thousands of people. And still to this day, the doctrines of Balaam. Look up Revelation. You should eat it. It's a delicious book. But here you go. There's some counting portions, right? But then, okay, here it is. Number 7, okay? Right here. You can screenshot that, pause it, and read it for yourself. Or you can get your own sword, son. Go sharpen it up. All right. I get through this whole chapter. Chelsea and I kind of figure out how important it was that each of these tribes got recognized, that they each gave, some of them out of their little. Some of them gave out of their almost non-existent anything compared to the big tribes. Because in Numbers, you also get a body count, which is vital information. And you see that some of these tribes were minuto. They were not the spectacular, like everybody's like, if I asked a total, like, Joe Blow, Rob and Sue kind of character on the side of the street and asked them to name me some of the tribes of Israel, you're generally only going to get a couple, right? Judah, that's up there. Benjamin, maybe, yep. People a lot of times will just say Israel. Yep, I hear that. Sometimes they'll say Ephraim and Manasseh. Less often do you hear things like Naphtali, Dan. You know, there's all these other tribes that don't get as much. Asher, they just don't get as much screen time. I'm even trying to glance at some of my own because I'm trying to remember them because I already forgot their names. It's like that sometimes with them. But because of that, they seem to not get it mentioned as much. But yet here at the moment where they're dedicating the tabernacle, they are suddenly each given equal opportunity. They're each given their own separate time to make this offering. And it was not a cheap date. It was extraordinarily expensive. All this silver and gold, which is amazing. I love silver and gold. We should talk someday about making silver, gold, and copper knives and swords. It would be amazing. We could grow it out of crystals. I'm serious. Just like they do compressed, air-cooled compressor blades. Look up the Rolls-Royce turbine blades. There's so many opportunities. Anyways, I get distracted every time I think about blades and knives and gold. So each tribe has an opportunity to actually make an offering that was very important, because what we realized when we were researching this was that they were giving a dinner plate. Basically, they were giving like their set of utensils for eating at the feast. Not totally, right? I get that. But a lot of what happens in the tabernacle and the offerings that you read about in the scriptures makes no sense to us, because we don't think that they actually sat down and ate a meal with the master of awesomeness. That'd be the creator of the heavens and the earth. Some of it had to do with them straight up just sitting down and eating a meal, which is fantastic because you worked hard to raise a goat or a sheep or a ram, or it was very costly for you to acquire one, and you wanted to be also able to share in that. So there's actual sacrifices and all kinds of stuff where you get to eat, which is fantastic and delicious. And then it makes me think of Revelation and this wonderful meal that we're all longing towards and hoping for, which is like the meal of eternity's wonder. The bride is reunited with the bridegroom. It's the supper of all suppers. It's the most delicious, extravagant thing ever. But each tribe, even out of their plenty or out of their lack, made sure to have an offering fit, worthy of their time with the king. And I think that's spectacular. A lot of these were used for the ministering of the priests to the tabernacle, but it offered each of them an opportunity to demonstrate their faithfulness with their little or their much. And it's fantastic. But as I went through Numbers, we persevered through that chapter. We got to eat some meat out of it that I had not expected, and I'll probably read it a little bit differently. But then we got into Numbers 8, or 9, really 9. Man, I can't even remember now. Needless to say, what we got into, though, was Numbers 8 and 9 and 10, which are some of my favorite chapters because it gets all dicey. You start learning about things like the cloud by day and the fire by night, but in way more description than you get in Exodus. Exodus is kind of like a flyover passage sometimes. Numbers and Deuteronomy zero you in on some of the meaty stories that you really want to know about. Like, how did people know when to move and where to move and why? Because if you ever spend any time in the wilderness. Like my wife and I, sometimes we've lived our life where we stay somewhere for months. It's spectacular. We get to live in a little tiny nugget of Eden. She's going to put out a video soonish. It's a lot of work to make a video, and we have tiny children that are outrageously needy. That being said, she's going to put out a farming video so you guys can see where we actually were in Florida and all of the wonders of what we did and accomplished down there. Our original farming experience in Colorado, not a for-profit organic farm. The one we were in Florida definitely was. And the amount of productivity and learning that we were able to accomplish down there was prodigious. And I want you guys to see it, but I also want you guys to see some of the techniques we learned down there, because a lot of you are really getting into gardening right now, and you need to learn some hard-earned lessons that other people have learned ahead of you. And we learned a lot of them down there, and we want to try to share those with you guys and equip people with the best that we possibly can and understanding of how to be effective with lots of resources or very little resources, because we've done gardening now on no budgets and on budgets that are thousands of dollars a week. And it's very different, but at the same time, you can be extraordinarily effective. And because of that, we want people to be able to see that. But, oh man, lost that rabbit trailed a little bit further outside of my paradigm of recovering it. It's okay. I'll circle back eventually. But needless to say, we realized we kind of move under the unction of the Father. Either he gives us peace to stay somewhere, or he'll take our peace from us and we have to leave. Stuff like that. We have our own methods for determining that. But back then, in the camp of Israel, these people had the literal presence of the living Elohim. The mighty creator of the heavens and the earth would come down in fire. Awesome. In fire down into the tabernacle, and he would abide there. Fire by night, because you're in the desert. A lot of times people forget this. If you haven't lived in the desert, I'm from it. Check out all the other documentaries about the horrors, nightmares that happen in the desert lands. That you can look into that all you want. But the desert's outrageously boiling your face off, melt your sand kind of hot days. At night, it can be outrageously cold. Unbelievably cold, and the shock to your body is tremendous. But they also had livestock and babies and children and goats and all kinds of animals all around them that they needed to keep insulated. So the fire literally provided them protection, light, heat, warmth. It provided their needs at night. And then in the morning, the cloud by day would be upon it. And that is also air conditioning. You ever think about that? You ever been somewhere where it's barren and hot and all you want more than anything in the history of your known time is a cloud? How good does a cloud feel in the desert where it's not totally humid all the time? A cloud in the desert provides you like 25, 30 degrees of temperature cooling. It's tremendous. Now, if it stayed with you, it might even offer you moisture. And if it offered you moisture, it might even offer you grass, which might offer you pastures, which might offer you milk. And then you get meat. I mean, it's everything you need, right? It's literally the sustenance by day and by night that they needed in order to also be a perpetual beacon. This is where the people of the living Elohim are. A powerful witness, right? Powerful witness to all the little tribal spies that are sending their people to check out what in the world is this wandering million-plus group doing out here in the desert. Wow, they've apparently got fire by night. That's pretty outrageous. But what's described in this passage, I might just read it because it was absolutely fantastic. Okay, this is now getting into Numbers 9. I'm going to probably get to David. I may get to David and Nabal. We're going to get in there. That's going to be in 1 Samuel 25-ish. So hang your hat on that, potentially. We'll find out. Okay, are you ready for this? Now, on the day that the tabernacle was erected, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, and in the evening it was like the appearance of fire over the tabernacle until morning. So it was continuously. The cloud would cover it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. Whenever the cloud was lifted from over the tent, afterward, the sons of Israel would then set out, and in the place where the cloud settled down, there, the sons of Israel would camp. And at the command of Yahweh, the sons of Israel would set out, and at the command of Yahweh, they would camp. As long as the cloud settled over the tabernacle, they remained camped. Even when the cloud lingered over the tabernacle for many days, the sons of Israel would keep Yahweh's charge and not leave. If sometimes the cloud remained a few days over the tabernacle, according to the command of Yahweh, they remained camped. Then, according to the command of Yahweh, they set out. If sometimes the cloud remained from evening until morning, when the cloud was lifted in the morning, they would move out. Or if it remained in the daytime and at night, whenever the cloud was lifted, they would set out, whether it was 2 days or a month, or a year that the cloud lingered over the tabernacle, staying above it, the sons of Israel remained camped and did not set out. But when it was lifted, they set out. At the command of Yahweh they camped, and at the command of Yahweh they set out. They kept Yahweh's charge according to the command of Yahweh through Moses. Okay. This is a literal, perfect communication system for the believers in the wilderness, the Hebrews. They haven't crossed quite over yet, the Jordan. That's what Hebrew means, if you didn't know it. It means crossed over. When they crossed over from the wilderness into the Jordan, they literally became Hebrews. Fantastic. Check it out. It's one of the most powerful ways of communicating directional need was the cloud coming up and down, right? Because the people literally had to follow it in a sense in order to sustain themselves. They must go where it was going. It also says later that they would take the Ark of the Covenant, the actual where the sapphire tablets of the instructions of the living Elohim were written upon it, the rod that budded, these amazing things, manna, all this stuff that was in there. It would go out ahead of them, 3 days' journey, and it would find a place for them. The spirit of the living Elohim would direct the Ark of the Covenant and the priests who were carrying it to the spot for their next camp. It would go ahead of them, though, and prepare a place for them. And that's incredible because now not only do they have the best scout in known time, which is the one who can see the entire earth always. That's pretty good. You want that as your scout out there. If you need a place to sleep, you want to send that out ahead of time. It's like supernatural insight and directional capabilities needs to be in your playbook. That's a good one. It's way better than GPS can ever hope to do because it also is the spiritual discerning rod between man and their machinations of wickedness. It's pretty powerful. But it was so incredible when I read that today because I finally had this realization that Chelsea and I have been living our lives for about 21 months like that. The first 7 or 8 months of our traveling was kind of traveling every single day almost. We would pick up and move almost every day because I didn't have a car. So I had to drive my RV every single where I wanted to go. Like, hey, guess what's up? Groceries are needed. Let's move our entire house and turn it back into the transformer it came out of and put it all away and roll. We did that constantly. So I'm a pretty spectacular driver when it comes to moving this thing around in odd places. But now we got a car. And once we got a car, it allowed us the ability to move without the vehicle being our house. And that was so nice because we could plant somewhere a little bit longer. And then that gave us the opportunity to settle in a little bit and plant plants and then eat the fruit from the plants later on. And that's a really special thing. But at the same time, we've also been moving sometimes every single day. The last few weeks, a lot of that. And that brings its totally different set of challenges. Like when every single day you have someone like a police officer come and say, I know you fit here technically, but it's probably not a good idea to park here because you're probably in the worst part of town. But that being said, we'll sleep somewhere if we feel the peace there. And that's so powerful. And we know the Israelites are some of the few people that I think that really get that, apart from other roadies out there. There's some folks out there, shout out to Adam and Joni Adventures. There are other roadie buddies, and they're going through that, if you know what I mean, where you're just picking up and moving sometimes all the time, and then suddenly you're stopped for a while. But what that does is it creates for you this dependency. It changes your perspective from a potential knowing that things are just going to be good for a long time to I always kind of have to be ready to know that I may need to leave immediately. And it does something to you. It makes you recognize that you are not made to live and abide where you currently are forever. This is not your home, right? People would use the word pilgrim. You're a pilgrim passing through. And when you're planted in a neighborhood or a house or land and you're able to stay there knowing that that's yours or that's a place to stay long term, it does something to you that can bring in you a different kind of peace and also a willingness to deepen your roots, which is great. If that's where you're called to be, that's fantastic. But if you're called to be a pilgrim or a wanderer, you don't have that. You're always almost there maybe, and then other times you're so thankful for just the single night of sleep. Like I've traveled sometimes from parking lot to parking lot to parking lot all in the same night because the peace wasn't there. Every time we go to get somewhere, it was wrong and we needed to leave. Or there's a lot of security guards and you realize, wow, there's a prodigious amount of other travelers here with signs that say you're not welcome. We learned a lot of lessons along the way. But David and his mighty men in the wilderness also are experiencing that because there's times where David and his families, because remember, David and all his mighty Gibborim are full of families and children. And that's important. People got to talk about that more than they do, and so we're going to. And this is one of those times where David's actually going to grow his family. Another man's going to be turned into stone. Yes, because petrification is a genuine disorder that can happen when you upset the living King of Glory. Unrecommended. All right, let's jump into it, shall we? If you haven't followed along with this, we are reading through 1 Samuel. Some of these mighty men stories. And not all the ones that get the press time, remember? Because everyone deserves all the press time. And here's one of those stories where petrification is happening and nobody talks about it. All right, are you ready? Let's jump into this. And then Samuel died, and all of Israel gathered together and mourned for him, and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And the woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. That David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, 'Have a long life, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David.' When David's young men came, They spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know?" So David's young men retraced their way and went back, and they came and told him all according to these words. David said to each of his men, this is just the best line ever. All right, sorry. I can't not read this twice. So David said to each of his men, "Each of you, gird on your sword." So each man girded on his sword. Here's a memory verse for you today, okay? Here it is, 1 Samuel 25:13. David said to his men, "Each of you, gird on your sword." So each man girded on his sword. You can memorize that, can't you? Because someday somebody might write to you a passage like 1 Samuel 25:13, and you might suddenly know, I'm to gird my sword up, son. Yes, you are. Fantastic. Moving on. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out witness protection. It's a lengthier way of the Gibborim, but it's going to teach you some tradecraft, and you might need it. And David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. I gotta say it, the baggage is literally also their supplies and their families. That's what he says. Because mighty men in the face of battle, it's a little different when you're looking at things like that. Because it's hard to run fast when you're carrying a toddler and using a sword at the same time. I've literally tried. If you haven't read my book, there's a chapter called, what's it called? Best Friend Betrayal? No, just before that one. 38 or 39. In there, A Man and His Dog. It's in there. It's about me and my dog getting attacked by 3 pit bulls while I was wearing a baby, while trying to reach for some of my tools. It didn't go very well. It was bloody and bad. So you can read about that some other time, or just listen to the chapter on my audio book that I read to you on YouTube. Anyways, but one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them. While we were in the fields, they were a wall to us, both by night and by day. All the time we were with them, tending the sheep. Now therefore, know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household, and he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him." Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, and 5 sheep already prepared, and 5 measures of roasted grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, "Go on before me. Behold, I am coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And it came about as she was riding on her donkey and came down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her. So she met them. First of all, don't forget, this is David in full bloodlust mode, all right? If you've never been in full bloodlust mode, it's hard to pause. But remember, we talked about restraint. Check out episode 13. Restraint is one of the most powerful tools you were ever given. Now, David had said, "Surely in vain I have guarded all that this man..." Oh, hold on, sorry. No, that's right. Now David had said, "Surely in vain I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. May Elohim so do to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male who pisseth against a wall." When Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the blame. And please let your maidservant speak to you, and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my lord pay attention to this worthless man, Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my lord, as Yahweh lives, and as your soul lives, since Yahweh has restrained you from shedding blood, and from avenging yourself by your own hand. Now then, let your enemies and those who seek evil against my lord be as Nabal. Now let this gift which your maidservant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who accompany my lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for Yahweh will certainly make for my lord an enduring house, because my lord is fighting the battles of Yahweh, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Should anyone arise up to pursue you and to seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with Yahweh your Elohim. But the lives of your enemies he will sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when Yahweh does for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause, and by my Lord having avenged himself. When Yahweh deals with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. Then David said to Abigail, Blessed be Yahweh Elohim of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed, and from avenging myself by my own hand. Nevertheless, as Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had come quickly to meet me, surely there would not have been much left to Nabal until morning light, as one such male who pisseth against the wall. So David received from her hand what she had brought to him, and said to her, Go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and granted your request. Then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. But in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, so that he became stone. About 10 days later, Yahweh struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be Yahweh, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from evil. Yahweh has also returned the evil doing of Nabal upon his head. Then David sent a proposal to Abigail to take her as his wife. And when the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. She arose and bowed with her face to the ground. Behold, your maidservant is a maid to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. Then Abigail quickly arose and rode on a donkey with her 5 maidens, who attended her, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David also had taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both became his wife. Now Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who's from Gedlim. Talk about a meaty chapter, right? I think that chapter is one of the most incredible ones, and if you ever have any kind of intentionality in your life to bear a sword in any capacity, you need to really focus on chapters like that, because there's going to be some times in your life where people rile you up in a wrong kind of way. People poke the bear. Do you know what I mean? The wrong kind of bear. Because here's what's hard about being someone who might be called a shepherd out there. You might just also look after and protect people who don't have any clue you're protecting them all the time. You might be the person that makes people's lives much more pleasant, but they have no idea that that's actually happening because of you at that moment. Because here's what's powerful. When the Spirit of the living Elohim lives on you, he provides for you peace and protection where you go. If the cloud moves over that spot, wherever you and your men or the people that are in your governed authority, wherever that goes is the safest place in anywhere, actually. Because when the Israelites were encamped, do you know a single time that they ever got destroyed while they were in camp when there was a giant fiery pillar in front of everybody else? I don't, because the other time somebody came against them with the most advanced army in the history of the time that this story was occurring. Pharaoh's army, when they went after the Israelites, when they were on the run, and they went to the Red Sea, like the wall of water behind them, and then, oh my gosh, it's like the entire United States military, unacknowledged and acknowledged force is coming after you, and they have you cornered. It's game over, son, right? And yet, there was a fire that came in a pillar in front of them. It says the angel of Yahweh. I'm pretty sure that's Jesus, Yeshua, the Son of the living God. He's the rock that followed him. He's the living waters. He was the manna from heaven. He's all over it, right? But he stood behind them and kept the enemy on the other side of that. That's one of the most powerful protective forces known ever. Pure walls of fire. Those work pretty well. You could, I'm pretty confidently say, melt anything that ever came your way, more or less. I think it's one of the most incredible things ever. David and his men provided Nabal's shepherds, all of Nabal, all of his household's goods, a wall of that protection. But they may not have even known it as well, because Nabal, it sounds like, wasn't too in tune with his household affairs, if you know what I mean. He sounded like he was a little more drunk as a skunk than he was as paying attention to his household servants. Rumor mill. So David and all his men had done a righteous thing in protecting and providing a peace and a deliverance over an area and around an area, and they had not exploited or taken from those that were there with them. They provided the shepherds all that they needed in a really powerful way, because shepherds are children. Remember, they can get exploited pretty quickly. People can come along and start stealing their sheep right out from under them because they have a staff. They don't have a very effective long-range distance tool besides a shepherd sling, remember? Yeah, so don't spook on any shepherds anytime soon now. But that being said, David's men provided that to him. And when David was hoping that he might be able to receive some of the blessings of the excess of the growth that had happened, because sheep tend to multiply. And it sounds like Nabal's sheep were seriously multiplying. 1,000 goats, folks, think about this. One goat can produce, a gallon of milk. A gallon of like raw goat's milk these days in the black market economy of where most humans live is like $12, $12. And if maybe he needed two goats to get half a gallon out of each goat, it's pretty doable. I known some prodigious goats in my days. They would be getting like 500 gallons of milk a day if all of them were milking, but I guess not all of them are. I'm making a bad analogy. Either way, the dude was so loaded on milk, I just think about that. There was rivers of milk potentially flowing out of that camp at times. And this is one of those times because it's shearing season, which means they are plentiful in wool, and everybody needs to wear wool. Remember, go back to all my videos where I tell you should wear wool and linen. Wool day. It's raining. Wool absorbs water. It don't mind. It still keeps your body heat trapped on your skin where it needs to be. Anyways, David goes in for a sweet meal, right? He's hoping for basically kind of like a tithe. And it's a powerful thing that he could have given that. Nabal could have given that in plenty, clearly. But instead, he rejects that. And then he insults David. Terrible decision, right? Because David is also the guy who now has 400 basically career criminals. Don't forget, a lot of David's guys, debtors, discontented, and people who were on the run. Ooh, I just lost it. Oh my goodness. That's okay. I'll circle back eventually. But basically it was people that were discontented, not happy about their situation, indebted, and just genuinely needing somewhere else to live and be provided for. David authored that for them. So when David gets insulted, they take a grift to it, and they go and get ready to smoke that son because it's a dude. They're ready to go after giants, remember? And instead there's a guy who's being ornery with his sheep. David, though, along the way, meets one of the wisest women, I think, in the entirety of Scripture. Because Abigail, if you didn't know it, is pretty much the most Gibborim ever woman in the Scriptures. She never gets press coverage, but Abigail's amazing. She is a warrior of a first-class kind. She is not, if you paid attention very carefully to what Abigail was saying in there, she literally was like the model of a Proverbs 31 woman. If you haven't read Proverbs 31, read it. It's the Gibborim for women chapter of awesomeness. Oh my gosh. Abigail is like that in perfect textbook description to such an extent that her blessings that come out of her mouth are so powerful, and her curses that come out of her mouth were so powerful, I'm pretty certain Yahweh hearkened to her words and answered them and petrified the man who was worthless, the man who literally was the definition of the fool. From all the rest of Proverbs, if you ever read that, that's the non-Gibborim. That's the Gibborim of the stupid side. Do you know what I mean? He's on that side of the fence post, and it's a dirty, rotten, rusty nail that's about to go through your foot kind of fence post. It's a bad place to be. And Nabal, because of that, he rejects David, but Abigail literally turns away the fierce wrath of a king. That's so incredible. And gentle lips and a tame tongue can do these things. It's amazing what she does in there. It's a spiritual disarmament match, and she crushes it. It's fantastic. And it's a story I seriously wanted to applaud because it was awesome in ways that I can't even imagine. My wife has done this for me and to me so many times in my life. She has become the embodiment of that in ways that I never even thought were possible. I didn't know how valuable it was to look for those character traits to be expressed in my wife until I started having children and realized how unbelievably impossibly difficult it would be for me to raise children without her. She is an extension of life to me. She provides for me in my home ways and things that I can't even keep track of half of it. You hear all this stuff that's going through my head all the time. Not necessarily like, how do I use ingredients that I have in my pantry all the way down to the bare bones and make something delicious? Because you know what dads do? Hey, guess what, kids? Tuna fish salads. We're really good at toast and eggs and scrambled things and, vegetables, basic salads. I put olive oil and balsamic vinegar on a salad. Chelsea comes out with like 18 different things and ingredients on a salad, and I am satiated and satisfied. When I eat a salad that I make, it's like I just had to slaughter a cow. It was exhausting to get its way through my teeth. It was brutal. She's fantastic. She works harder than anybody I personally have ever known. I'm serious. I've known guys when we were in training where we were awake for days on end, right? But then it ended, and we went back to not always using stimulants to keep ourselves awake 24/7. My wife can't use any of that. She breastfeeds like a fantastic mom. She gives her life vitality literally away all day and all night long, and then still tends to an entire household all day, all night long. And sometimes babies don't sleep even a little bit, and then she doesn't either. And then it's a never-ending series of circles that women have to repeat when they're rearing children. It is so much labor. It doesn't just stop because you gave birth. It just adds orders of magnitudes in different ways. And we're in that right now in a serious way. And I'm watching her pour her life, pour her vitality, pour the essence of who she is out. My children literally drain her of her vitality. She gives it to them. And we've got 2 very happily sized, wonderfully healthy and strong children because of it. But she has to continue to sacrifice that in order for that to be raised up and for my home to have that. She gives herself away perpetually. And it is a mark of sacrificial love that I cannot comprehend unless I was the one to receive it. I have been the one who's been blessed to receive it. She's also been the one to stay my sword. And that is so valuable to have. She's given me restraint. She's taught me how to be slower to speak, how to be more intentional and strategic about not always using the tongue of my sword to just cut ribbons into people because I know the truth. She's made me meeker in many ways, and she's bridled this aspect of myself, and I needed that. Abigail does that with David in such an honorable and respectful way that David can do nothing but after she is done speaking, but to bless her, to look to her and see character traits that were so spectacular that it was something that he knew was desperately beneficial for him and his men to heed that advice and to turn their swords and to return in peace and leave peace in that house. Because you know what? The name Jesus, the name Yeshua, do you know what it means? One of the predominant names, like what it actually means? Avenger, defender, provider, refuge, relief. Like the avenger. And that's what he is. At the end of all of this, he is the great avenger who will genuinely reap the great harvest of the earth. And it is a great and terrible thing to think about, but I do with regularity. And I think of how wonderful it is that even in the plenty or in the lack, the Father is looking for each of us to be faithful with what he's entrusted us, whether we are man, whether we are woman, a boy, a child, a teen, wherever we may be, that we look very carefully at what he's entrusted to us and recognize that each of us gets an opportunity to still have an audience with the King of Glory on that great day. And by our words, it says we will be condemned. And by our words, right, we will be vindicated. And so think heartily about what it is that you're going to speak. Think about how much power and influence that you have on an opportunity to change the circumstances in the lives of the people around you right now. The world is turning in a set of vice grips and cranking itself tighter and tighter, and these springs are tensioning right now. And people are in a place where they are hungry for understanding. They're seeking out knowledge and wisdom and truth like never before. You have prime real estate all around you, and you must learn to labor in those fields. Labor diligently. Be intentional and strategic with that, because we all get an opportunity to present ourselves and our offerings and our sacrifices to the King of Glory. And whether that's to righteousness or to destruction, the people of Israel, even the little tribes, they got their testimonies shared. They got to be remembered. They got given an opportunity for their stories to be remembered forever. We each need to seek for our stories, our testimonies to be as effectively wielded and used strategically to affect lives of the people around us, but to do it with meekness, with restraint, and with precision of language. Because remember, the days are evil out there, but you were born for such a time as this. So use wisely this time that you've been entrusted. Be diligent to safeguard it, to hunger after it, and to allow at the end of the day, if need be, him alone to be your avenger. I say all this to hope one thing for each and every one of you. Be safe out there. And by that I mean live strategically, as dangerously as possible, every single day of your lives. I love you. Be vigilant. Do not grow weary of doing what is good, but be faithful always, even unto death.